Hello, everybody. My name is Raheem Jasani, and welcome to The Unfortunate Truth. I hope you liked our last episode and it was well informed. That was our goal. But for today's show, instead of highlighting something that you didn't know, I wanted to talk about an issue you've heard of, but you probably can't understand why it hasn't been solved.
Should Washington, D.C. become a state? The House is voting on a statehood bill for the first time since 1993.
Statehood bill, H.R. 51, is passed without objection.
Now to make the District of Columbia a state. They've attempted this before, but this is further along than many thought they would get.
The nation's capital is looking for their voice. Residents of D.C. want their city to be more than a holiday destination or a place for the elite. They want to be the 51st state of the United States. But you're probably thinking, DC is amazing. It has all these monuments and important people. It's doing just fine. Why reduce it to be the same, category as Florida? But the reality is that unlike public perception, DC isn't just Trump sitting at the White House eating McDonald's while watching Fox News. It has over 700,000 residents, a majority of whom are black, who have actual concerns about their home. But the problem is, they can't express them.
The residents of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, have been denied their right to fully participate in their democracy.
D.C. residents being the only people in the free world whose capital city residents aren't represented in the Capitol is simply anti-American.
Problem for D.C. It has no vote on the House floor and no senators. It's not a state, so it can't. The city has no vote in Congress, yet its residents pay federal taxes.
The Chinese pandas at the National Zoo have as much right to representation in the U.S. Congress as any resident in the District of Columbia.
The pandas and other D.C. residents are looking to make their home a state. The idea of D.C. being a state isn't just a symbolic gesture for them. It means everything. You're probably thinking, oh, they're a city, they must have a mayor, and don't they have that congresswoman? Well, you're partially right. These people do exist, but their power doesn't. For instance, DC's Congresswoman Eleanor Horton is allowed to author bills, but not vote on them. They essentially gave her pretend power, the same power you give your kids when you give them a fake kitchen set. It's all fun and games when they actually eat the frickin' fake food and want statehood, of course. And when it comes to mayors and city councilmen, well, they have real power, but it's constantly undermined by the federal government, who has larger power.
City in America, Congress has the final say over its budget and laws, and D.C. does not have full representation on the Hill.
Like other territories, its final say in its governance comes from the federal government, with the mayor of the district acting as sort of a watered-down form of governor.
So in 1974, Congress passed the Home Rule Act, which gave the United States Congress exclusive jurisdiction over the district in all cases whatsoever. According to Congresswoman Norton, Congress can intervene at any times in the district businesses, and they have taken full advantage of this power. Here are a couple examples. 1. Over the past 12 years, Congress has blocked all legalizing marijuana sales despite voters overwhelmingly wanting it. 2. Congress has blocked the use of local tax dollars for abortion services. 3. In 2015, Congress passed a bill to remove all funding from the registration of guns. 4. Between 1998 and 2007, Congress removed all funding from needle exchange programs that help prevent the spread of HIV. For years, Congress has been acting like the bad parent who controls everything in DC and is waiting for it to mature. But the fact is, it's been over 200 years and DC wants to move out. It's tired of being treated like a child. And it doesn't help when there's another child dictating the way DC can protest.
I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers.
This was the moment at which the district's drive to statehood achieved real traction. Federal officers dispersed protesters outside the White House in an action ordered by the Trump administration, not by the city's elected officials.
But because we are not a state, the federal government can encroach on our autonomy and bring in federal forces to protect federal assets. And that's what we see in D.C.
Since they're not a state, only the president can make the tough call and call the National Guard. However, our president can barely speak the English language properly, and you want him to make the call for the National Guard? But to be fair, it shouldn't be his decision in the first place. Usually in these cases, the state, right, the governor has the power to call in the Guard, and they're more likely to understand the city's or state's problems, right, of when to call them or when not to call them. And that's the point. DC officials and residents understand their problems, not the federal government. They should be worrying about governing the nation. But just no matter how logical or democratic the state case may be, it doesn't look like it's going to be a state anytime soon.
I think it's patently unconstitutional to change the nature of District of Columbia to a new state. I think it is a bad deal for the country.
The last thing we should be doing is giving Washington, D.C. more power.
Washington is a federal city and should remain a federal city. It's a federal city. It is the seat of the federal government. The main thing it contributes to our national economy is influence peddling, regulations, and no offense, tweeting by reporters.
Lindsey Graham and his little boy band of Republican politicians, and quite frankly, most of the nation, doesn't want to see DC as a state. I've heard a variety of arguments to support this. Some of them make sense and others are just plain out stupid. But for the sake of fairness, we're going to go through the main three. So let's first talk about constitutionality. Right? It is true our founding fathers wanted DC to remain a district. But the Constitution can change and it's not always correct. Don't you guys remember the 3/5 compromise? Yes, there may be some constitutional adjustment or, by adding or removing some amendments. But even when the founding fathers put the federal government together, they didn't think that Congress would just do what it wants. They thought it would do what's best for the district. In addition, some people say DC is too small under the Constitution to be even considered a state. However, this new bill would rework the district lines to avoid populated areas like the Capitol building and the White House, and Congress has the authority to do that. And hopefully they can actually use their authority properly this time. Moving on from this, let's talk about the economic arguments, in particular from this Republican senator.
Aside these practical and constitutional problems with DC statehood, though, we return to a basic truth. Washington is a city with all the characteristics of a city, not a state. Wyoming is smaller than Washington by population, but it has 3 times as many workers in mining, logging, and construction, and 10 times as many workers in manufacturing. In other words, Wyoming is a well-rounded, working-class state. But what vital industries would the new state of Washington represent? Lobbying? Bureaucracy? Give me a break.
Okay, Senator Cotton couldn't be more wrong. First off, you just can't ignore the fact that DC is a larger population than Vermont and Wyoming. That's a big contention. Second, you also can't say the fact that Wyoming is mainly a state because it has working class Americans. You're only going to rely on one job. White collar jobs and lobbying aren't a job group for some reason. A job is a job. And simply to say that a city can never be a state because it's originated as a city is complete bullshit.
Operate our own schools. We manage state Medicaid programs. We receive federal block grants. Like states, we issue driver's licenses, license plates, and birth and death certificates. We regulate banks and insurance companies, operate our state-based affordable care marketplace, and we enforce environmental regulations. For the purposes of thousands of federal laws, we act as a state and we do it well.
DC is more than qualified to be considered a state. In addition to all these basic elements, DC residents pay the highest per capita federal income taxes in the United States. In total, DC residents pay more federal income taxes than 22 other states, but have no say in how the tax dollars are spent. DC even has a larger GDP than 13 other states. Their GDP is so large that it can be compared to other countries. It has a larger GDP than freaking Austria. I'm so confused of where this congressman got his argument from. And I also want to ask him, have you ever been to DC? It's an economic powerhouse. I went to a grocery store and a water bottle was $6. That's economic terrorism. Give me a break. But even if some people were to agree with me about the constitutionality or economic importance, many people don't care about these logistics. They simply can't handle the fact that there's going to be 51 stars. They want it to be balanced, Oh, why not give DC residents representation? Oh, it wouldn't look nice, balance. Are you freaking Thanos that you need everything to be balanced? Get out of here. But Raheem, what about the song? 50, nifty. Change the damn song. It's not that deep. But what is important is these residents getting the representation. Yet it's hard for them to even have a fighting chance in the Senate, as Lindsey Graham and his boy band of Republicans think of DC statehood as a joke.
To the argument that people in DC are disenfranchised, it would be very easily for Maryland to give them the ability to participate in national politics. They want to be part of Maryland.
You could use this map. You could make some practical accommodations for the security and the safety of our federal institutions and retrocede the entire residential part of Washington, D.C. back to Maryland.
Vote to return residential portions of D.C. to Maryland, thus giving D.C. citizens the power to vote on Maryland's 2 U.S. senators. That option is consistent with historical precedents, but I will never vote to give a single middling-sized city the same political power as one of America's great 50 states.
Now, this may seem like a reasonable idea to you, a perfect solution where both parties get what they want. But the question is, where would DC even go? The White House would be a part of Maryland, and the Pentagon is a part of Virginia. It caused major debate between the border lines and forced one of these states to adopt DC without asking the permission of any of these states. We can't just put DC in Maryland or Virginia. In addition, 86% of voters supported their DC statehood. They don't want to go live with grandma and grandpa. They want their autonomy, not some half-assed version of it, where they have to follow other people's rules. And right now, you're probably really mad at me, right? Because I haven't given you any virtual solution, right? Is it DC statehood all the way? But the solution to this and many other problems in our nation lies with fixing our political gridlock. And that was the point of this episode. DC statehood is a perfect metaphor for the problems of our country. You have basic legislation like gun control, education spending, that overwhelmingly most of the country supports, and nothing is getting done from both sides. When the Senate rejects this bill, the Democrats will take the moral high ground, but the reality is that Congresswoman Norton has been placing this same statehood bill for the past 30 years, and only today are Democrats hearing their cry for help. And also, DC statehood would mean 2 extra Democratic senators that would completely shift the balance of power. And they're going to try to capitalize this issue and use DC residents as a way to gain political momentum. And on the other side of the political spectrum, Republicans don't want to lose their power, even if it means depleting citizens the right to vote. They simply just don't care. Most of the time, a Republican-controlled Congress has imposed ridiculous laws that residents don't support, which is ironic coming from the Republican Party because they're the champions of localism and states' rights. This idea that cities and states should do as they please without the intervention of federal government unless it's important. It was Ronald Reagan who said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And constantly meddling into DC's affairs isn't the Republican government he dreamed about. So DC residents, your statehood, yes, is a far stretch. You have one party that doesn't seem to give it all, and the other party simply doesn't care. But keep your hope up. Keep yelling. Keep shouting. Keep posting. Use the rights that the government hasn't depleted from you, and let your voice become so strong that the government willingly steps up and says, let DC be DC. Thank you.